Hi viewers, you are listening the Alpha King's Untold Stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race and you will enjoy it a lot. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. Chapter 1. The wind howled through the towering pines of the Northern Territories, carrying with it the scent of snow and pine needles. Every werewolf on the continent knew that sound. It was the sound of his kingdom, and every one of them feared the wolf who ruled it. Alpha King Cyrus Blackwood was carved from winter itself, a man of ice and steel, whose very name was whispered with a mixture of reverence and dread. He had ended wars with a single command, executed traitors without a flicker of remorse, and his smile, well, no living soul could claim to have seen it, not in a decade. He possessed everything: armies, wealth, absolute power, yet his vast, opulent castle felt emptier than the deepest cavern. For all his strength, he lacked the one thing fate owed every wolf, a destined mate. He had long ago accepted a solitary throne and a lonely heart. That resignation shattered on a crisp, snowy afternoon in the heart of the city. The threat wasn't an assassin's blade or a rival alpha's challenge. It was a tiny, sticky-fingered messenger with eyes the color of autumn honey. The annual winter solstice gala was a spectacle of light and politics, a necessary dance of diplomacy. For Cyrus, it was exquisite torture. The grand hall of the Blackwood estate overflowed with the clean scent of expensive perfumes and roasted meat, the air thick with the desperate hopes of high-ranking she-wolves. He stood apart on a marble balcony, a crystal glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, a statue of impatience. At 32, he was a mountain of a man, 6.5 feet of lethal grace, and he was profoundly, utterly bored. "They're circling again," his beta, Leo, muttered, appearing silently at his elbow. Leo was one of the few who could meet Cyrus's glacial gaze without flinching. "Lady Seraphina has accidentally dropped her glove near you 3 times. I believe she's trying to lay a scent trail." Cyrus let out a low, rumbling sound that was more vibration than laugh. "Let them circle. If I do not name a queen by the next full moon, the council will try to force a political match. I would rather dismantle the council throne by throne." "You need an heir, Cyrus," Leo said softly, abandoning formality. "The pack whispers. A king without his Luna? It's a kingdom without a heartbeat." "Superstition," Cyrus snapped, the word sharp as a blade. He set the glass down with a decisive clink. "I need air. Real air. I'm going to the public festival." "The public sector?" Leo's voice held a warning. "It's open to all ranks. The security risks." "I am the security," Cyrus interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. He descended a hidden staircase, leaving the glittering elite behind, and stepped into the bustling courtyard where the true celebration thrived. Here, families laughed under twinkling lights, children chased each other through falling snow, and the air was clean, sharp, and free of ambition. Cyrus moved through the crowd like a shadow, his immense aura causing people to instinctively step aside, though they didn't recognize their king. He paused by a magnificent ice sculpture of a howling wolf, his fingers unconsciously tracing the cuff of his shirt. Beneath the fine fabric, hidden from the world, was his birthmark, a silver crescent moon cradling a single, piercing star. The royal mark, his curse. Legend said only his fated mate would bear its twin. He had long ago searched for years. He had found nothing. Thump. A small, warm weight collided with his leg. Cyrus looked down. A vibrant pink ice cream cone was now smeared across the impeccable black wool of his trousers. Attached to the cone was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5, a bundle of wild chestnut curls and a bright blue coat that swallowed her small frame. The crowd around them froze, a collective gasp hanging in the air. Touching an unknown alpha of such obvious power was unthinkable. But Cyrus didn't growl, he didn't glare. Slowly, deliberately, he crouched down to her level, ignoring the ruined fabric. He looked into her wide, fearless eyes. "You've disarmed yourself, little soldier," his voice a gentle rumble so unlike his usual commanding tone. The girl sniffled, looking at the sad remains of her ice cream in the snow. Then her gaze lifted to him. She didn't cower. Instead, she reached out a sticky hand to steady herself, her small fingers wrapping around his left wrist. Her thumb brushed his cuff, pulling it back. The silver crescent moon was exposed to the cold light. The girl froze. Her honey-colored eyes went round with wonder. She traced the mark with her sugary finger. "Moon," she breathed, a whisper of awe. "Yes, it is a moon." The girl looked up, her expression suddenly grave, filled with knowledge far beyond her years. "My mommy," she whispered, her voice clear as a bell in the hushed silence. "My mommy has the same moon on her back." Time stopped. The music, the laughter, the very wind seemed to vanish. All Cyrus could hear was the deafening double-time roar of his own heartbeat. And from the depths of his soul, a beast that had slumbered in sorrow for years suddenly slammed against his ribs. It didn't just growl, it stood, alert, powerful, alive. Mate. The word wasn't a thought, it was a quake that shook his very foundation. His hands shot out, gripping the little girl's shoulders, his touch firm, urgent. "What did you say?" His voice was rough, scraped raw from disuse. "My mommy," the child repeated, pointing her tiny finger at his wrist with absolute certainty. "She has the moon picture. She gets sad when she sees it." "Where?" Cyrus demanded, his eyes flashing molten gold, the alpha surfacing with terrifying speed. "Elara!" A woman's voice laced with panic cut through the crowd. Cyrus' head snapped up. 20 feet away, fighting her way through the masses, was a woman. She was shrouded in a faded gray scarf and a bulky, nondescript coat, but Cyrus saw her. The curve of her cheek, the panicked wideness of her eyes. Honey and whiskey, just like the child's. And then her scent hit him. Not perfume, not flowers. It was the first rain on summer-baked earth, the warmth of sun-drenched vanilla. It was home. It was everything. The woman, Elara, stumbled to a halt, her eyes locked on his. She saw the gold blazing in his gaze. Recognition, then sheer, unadulterated terror transformed her face. Without a word, she lunged forward, scooped the little girl Elara had called her into her arms with desperate strength, and whirled around. "Run," she choked, the word a breathless plea to herself. But Cyrus's hearing caught it. "Wait!" The command that erupted from him was so powerful, it cracked the ice sculpture beside him, sending a web of fractures through the howling wolf. But the woman in gray was already running, a ghost dissolving into the sea of people. Cyrus was already moving. "Leo!" he roared into his comms device, his transformation from man to hunter complete. "Lock down every gate, north, south, east, west. No one leaves these grounds." He didn't run like a man, he ran like the apex predator he was, his golden eyes fixed on the fleeting glimpse of a faded gray coat, his heart and his wolf screaming in unison. "She has the mark, she has our child, and she is running from us." The hunt for the truth had begun. Elara's lungs burned with a fiery desperation that had nothing to do with the cold air. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a frantic bird trying to escape its cage. Poppy's solid, warm weight in her arms was both a blessing and an anchor, but adrenaline, pure and fierce, lent her a strength she never knew she possessed. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The image of him, Cyrus Blackwood, the Alpha King, crouched before her daughter, his eyes flashing that impossible, terrifying gold, was seared behind her eyelids. "He found us." The words were a death knell in her mind. She wove through the panicking crowd, the joyful lights now feeling like searchlights, the joyful music a mocking soundtrack to her flight. "Mommy, why are we running?" Poppy's small voice, muffled against her shoulder, was a knife to her heart. "The Moon Man was nice." He's not nice, baby, Elara gasped, her boots slipping on the icy cobblestones as she darted into a narrow, dimly lit alley behind the food stalls. He's very dangerous. Dangerous was a pale, insufficient word. He was the storm, and she had been foolish enough to step into its path 6 years ago. One masquerade ball, one stolen moment of anonymity in a moonlit garden with a stranger whose voice was like dark velvet and whose touch had felt like destiny. He had left before dawn, and she had woken up alone, her simple birthmark on her shoulder blade seared into a glowing silver brand, the twin to the one she'd glimpsed on his wrist tonight. She had gone to the council, trembling but hopeful, to report the bond, to find him. The clerk, a man with a serpent's smile named Silas, had listened with barely concealed scorn. You claim the king is your fated mate, a kitchen maid from the lower district? Child, if you approach the throne with this fantasy, he will publicly reject you to avoid the scandal. And the child, a half-blood heir born of a lowly servant? The law is clear. He would have no choice but to remove the complication. His cold eyes held no mercy. Run. Change your name. Forget this ever happened. It is the only way the little one lives. So she had run. Elara Lane had been buried, and Lena, a quiet waitress with a daughter and a story no one believed, had been born. She had lived in the shadows, jumping at every loud noise, dyeing her hair, moving from one cramped apartment to another. Her only goal was to keep Poppy safe and hidden. And now, because of a dropped ice cream cone, it was all over. She burst out of the alley's far end, the downtown subway station a beacon of grimy light 2 blocks away. Freedom. If she could just make it to the tunnels, she could disappear into the city's vast underbelly again. She set Poppy down on the slushy sidewalk, gripping her small hand. "Run, my brave girl, fast as the wind, just like we practiced." They ran, their breaths puffing white in the air, the sound of their footsteps echoing too loudly. They were almost there, the stairs to the subway yawning open like a promise, when a sleek black SUV with tinted windows screeched around the corner, mounted the curb, and slid to a halt, blocking their path entirely. Elara skidded, yanking Poppy back and shoving the girl behind her legs, a human shield against the unknown. The passenger door opened, and he stepped out. Cyrus. He looked different than he had in the festival lights. The controlled mask was gone, his tie missing, his collar open, his usually immaculate dark hair windswept, and his eyes, they were pure, liquid gold, fixed on her with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. He didn't speak. He just walked toward her, each step slow, measured, and utterly predatory, closing the 10-foot gap between them with the inevitability of a landslide. "Stay back!" The scream tore from her throat, raw and cracked. "Don't you come near her!" Cyrus stopped. He looked from her terror-widened eyes to Poppy, who was peeking out from behind her mother's leg. He took a slow, deep breath, inhaling her scent, and a shudder ran through his powerful frame. "You," he said, his voice a low, vibrating tremor of hurt and dawning fury. "You have been hiding from me for 6 years." He took a step closer. Elara pressed back against the cold brick wall of a building, trapped. "I felt it, a hole in my soul, a silence where a heartbeat should have been. And you were out here, silencing it for both of us." "I was protecting her," Elara yelled, defiance sparking through her fear. "I know the ancient laws. I know a king cannot have a half-blood heir. I won't let you hurt her to secure your pure-blood line." Cyrus's expression shifted, the rage flickered, replaced with a confusion so profound it looked like pain. Hurt her? Half-blood? He shook his head, as if trying to clear it of a terrible noise. "Elara, what are you talking about? Who told you I would hurt my own child?" "Don't pretend," she spat, tears of rage and fear finally spilling over. "Silas, the council clerk, he told me everything. He said you'd have us both killed if you ever found out." The name hung in the frigid air. Silas. Cyrus's face went utterly, terrifyingly still, all emotion drained from it, leaving something far more dangerous, a calm, deadly frost. Silas, he repeated, the word a soft, venomous curse. He took another step, now so close she could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the flecks of darker amber in his golden eyes. "Show me," he commanded, his voice dropping into a tone that was not a request. It was an alpha's order, a frequency that resonated in her very blood, compelling obedience. Her wolf, a presence she had suppressed for so long, whimpered and bowed its head. "Show me the mark." "No," Elara whispered, but her body was no longer her own. A traitorous tremor ran through her hands as they moved against her will, grasping the collar of her coat and the worn sweater beneath. She pulled the fabric down, baring her left shoulder blade to the chill alley air. There, glowing with a faint, ethereal silver light against her skin, was the undeniable truth, the perfect crescent moon cradling its jagged star. Cyrus let out a sound, a ragged exhale that was half sob, half roar. He closed the final distance in a blur. Elara flinched, bracing for violence, for rejection. Instead, warm, calloused hands came up to cradle her face, his touch astonishingly gentle. He pressed his forehead against hers, his eyes squeezing shut. "Mine," he breathed, the word a vow, a prayer, a claim. "You are mine, and I will destroy anyone who made you believe for even a second that I would ever bring you harm." Chapter 3. The ride back to the Blackwood estate was a silent journey through a world turned inside out. Elara sat stiffly in the luxurious back seat of the SUV, her arms locked around Poppy, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion and slept, her head a comforting weight on Elara's chest. Opposite them, Cyrus sat like a carved sentinel, his intense gaze a tangible pressure. He didn't glare, he observed, as if memorizing every detail of them, from the way Elara's fingers trembled as she stroked Poppy's hair, to the faint smudge of chocolate still on the little girl's cheek. He looked less like a captor and more like a dragon who had just located his stolen treasure, fiercely possessive and bewildered by its very existence. The city lights streaked past the tinted windows, a blur of a life she was being forcibly pulled from. "Are you hungry?" Cyrus's voice, softer now but still deep enough to vibrate in the quiet cabin, broke the silence. He was looking at Poppy. Elara's hold tightened instinctively. "We're fine." "She dropped her ice cream," he said, as if that explained everything. He leaned forward and opened a discreet mini-fridge, pulling out a small bottle of pear juice and a delicate linen napkin wrapped around what smelled like fresh, buttery shortbread. He offered them, not to Elara, but held them in Poppy's direction, a peace offering from a king who had no practice in making them. Poppy, stirring, blinked sleepily and, after a hesitant glance at her mother, took the juice with a small, "Thank you." "I will buy you an entire ice cream parlor," Cyrus stated, his tone utterly serious, "with 100 flavors." "Don't," Elara snapped, her protective walls slamming back up. "Don't buy her things. Don't try to bribe her. We don't want your money or your parlors. We just want to go home." Cyrus's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering along its strong line. "You have no home." The words were blunt, factual, not cruel. Not anymore. "I had Leo run your ID while we drove. Lena lives in a studio apartment in the lower district. The heating is broken. The locks are faulty. You work 2 shifts a day at a diner, on your feet for 16 hours. He leaned forward, his golden eyes capturing hers, and now the hurt was back, simmering beneath the surface. My queen, the other half of my soul, has been scrubbing floors and washing dishes while I sat on a throne of marble and gold, wondering why my world felt so empty. The title, Queen, struck her like a physical blow. I am not your queen, she hissed, the anger a familiar, safer friend than the terrifying confusion he stirred. I was a mistake, a one-night oversight. Silas said— Silas, Cyrus interrupted, the name a growl that made the driver's shoulders tense, is a dead man walking. But you need to understand something, Elara. Look at me. His command pulled her gaze up. I did not reject you. I never knew you existed. He looked down at his own hands, clenching them into fists. That night, the masquerade, I was compromised, drugged. I woke with no memory of the hours before, only a feeling, a profound sense of peace my wolf had not known in years, and a scent already fading from my sheets. I have spent 6 years searching for that scent in every corner of this kingdom. He lifted his eyes, and the raw, unguarded truth in them stole her breath. If I had known, if I had ever known that I had a mate and a child, I would have torn the world apart stone by stone to find you. No power on earth could have kept you from me. Elara wanted to disbelieve him. Her life had been built on his supposed cruelty for so long. But his voice, it carried the weight of mountains. It resonated in the newly awakened part of her soul that had recognized him the moment she saw his eyes. Silas had lied. The realization was a tidal wave, terrifying and liberating all at once. He is powerful, she whispered, the fight leaching out of her, leaving exhaustion in its wake. If he lied to me, he did it for a reason. If he sees me with you now— He sees me, Cyrus vowed, his voice dropping to a low, protective rumble, and he will understand the depth of his error. Tonight, you are not entering my home as a prisoner. You are entering through the front doors as the future of this pack. The SUV slowed, turning through imposing wrought iron gates that opened soundlessly. They were at the main entrance of the Blackwood estate, a fortress of ancient stone and modern steel that sprawled against the night sky. But the serene homecoming Cyrus had promised shattered before the vehicle even stopped. Flashing red and blue lights strobed against the snow-dusted driveway, painting the scene in pulses of alarm. Guards were running, voices raised in tense shouts. Leo threw open the passenger door before the SUV fully halted, his face grim in the chaotic light. "Alpha, you need to see this. Now." Cyrus was out of the car in an instant, placing his body between the open door and Elara, a shield of muscle and will. "Report." Cyrus's voice cut through the din. Leo pointed toward the grand, illuminated steps of the mansion. There, standing in a forbidding line, were 5 figures in the dark, ceremonial robes of the High Council, and at their center, wearing a smile as smooth and cold as polished ice, was Silas, the man who had stolen 6 years of her life. "Welcome home, Your Majesty," Silas called out, his voice oily and triumphant. "And it seems you have apprehended the fugitive. Most efficient." "Fugitive?" Cyrus's single word was a crack of thunder in the courtyard. "Yes," Silas said, holding up a scroll of official parchment. "This woman, this Lena, is a known agent of the Shadowfang Alliance. We have documented evidence that she infiltrated the masquerade 6 years past with the express purpose of stealing royal DNA to fabricate a false heir." The accusation hung in the air, absurd and brilliantly vicious. In the world of werewolf nobility, DNA theft and presenting a false heir were not just crimes, they were highest treason, punishable by public execution. Silas wasn't just attacking her, he was poisoning Poppy's very existence before Cyrus could claim her. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. "That's a lie!" she cried, but her voice was lost in the sudden murmur of the gathered guards. "She bears the mate's mark," Cyrus snarled, taking a step forward, the ground seeming to vibrate beneath him. "A mark easily forged with forbidden magic," Silas dismissed with a flick of his wrist.
"Guards, seize the woman and the child for interrogation. The king has been gravely deceived." 4 armored guards stepped forward from the shadows, their hands on their weapons. Cyrus did not move. He didn't even seem to breathe. With a chilling, deliberate slowness, he unbuttoned the cuffs of his shirt and began to roll up his sleeves, exposing the powerful cords of his forearms. "Leo," Cyrus said, his voice deceptively calm, "hold my jacket." He turned his molten gaze on the advancing guards, then on Silas and the entire council. "If any man," he announced, his voice booming with the full force of his alpha authority echoing off the stone walls, "if any one of you lays a hand on my mate or on my daughter, I will tear his heart from his chest with my bare hands." He took another step, a king advancing on his own court. "This is not a spy. This is my fated Luna, and this child," he said, his voice softening infinitesimally as he glanced toward the car, "is my blood, my heir." He turned his blazing eyes back to Silas, his final words dropping into a deadly whisper that carried to every ear. "I challenge any who dispute this to a blood duel. Here, now." A deafening silence swallowed the courtyard. A blood duel, an ancient, brutal rite, a fight to the death, where the victor's word became absolute, unchallengeable law. The guards froze. Even the council elders behind Silas paled. No one, not even the most ambitious, wanted to face an Alpha King who looked ready to shred the very fabric of the world. Silas's smug smile finally cracked, his eyes darting nervously. "There is no need for such barbarism, Your Majesty," he stammered, smoothing his robes. "We are civilized. If the child is truly yours, a simple standard lineage test will prove it, conducted by the council's own physicians, of course." "We do the test," Cyrus agreed, his voice like grinding stone, "but not with your physicians. We do it in my private medical wing, with my personal doctor, and you, Silas, may watch." His golden eyes promised this was not a concession, but a sentence, to ensure transparency. Silas's throat worked as he swallowed. "Agreed." The procession into the heart of the estate was a tense, silent funeral march. Elara held Poppy's hand so tightly her own fingers ached. The little girl, sensing the thick danger, was uncharacteristically quiet, her wide eyes taking in the vaulted ceilings and stern-faced guards. They were not being led to a dungeon, but they were prisoners all the same, caught in a web of politics and poison. The medical wing was a sterile, high-tech sanctuary of chrome and glass. Cyrus positioned himself as a living barrier between Elara and Silas. "Sit," he told her gently, helping her onto a bioscanner bed. He stood over her, a protective mountain. "I'm scared," she whispered, the confession torn from her. What if he rigs it?" "He cannot rig blood," Cyrus murmured, his voice for her alone. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a second, before he gently brushed a stray curl from her forehead. The unexpected tenderness was so at odds with the violence in the air that it made her heart ache. "My blood calls to yours. It sings to hers. It is biology, Elara. It is absolute." The royal physician, Dr. Eris, a gruff man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, arrived looking flustered. "Sire, what is the emergency?" "Paternity test and mate verification. Now." Dr. Eris's bushy eyebrows shot up, but he asked no questions. He drew a vial of deep crimson blood from Cyrus's arm. When he turned to Elara, the needle pricked her skin and she flinched. A low, involuntary growl rumbled in Cyrus's chest, a sound of pure, instinctive sympathy. Before she could think, his hand enveloped hers, their fingers intertwining. His palm was warm, rough, and solid. For the first time in 6 years, the terrifying loneliness receded, just a little. Then it was Poppy's turn. The little girl whimpered as the needle approached, and as the blood was drawn, the lights in the room flickered violently. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the metal frame of the bed. Dr. Eris paused, frowning at his equipment. "Sire, did you—" "Just run the test," commanded Cyrus, his eyes never leaving Silas, who was leaning against a wall, tapping something into a tablet, a faint, smug curve still on his lips. The samples were fed into the sequencer. 20 minutes. The seconds dragged like years. "You know," Silas said idly, breaking the heavy silence, "the penalty for presenting a false heir to the throne is public execution, hanging usually. Such a pity. The girl, she might have made a decent scullery maid in time." Cyrus moved. It was a blur of fury. 1 second he was holding Elara's hand, the next he had Silas pinned against the glass wall, his forearm a crushing bar against the councilman's throat. "One more word," Cyrus whispered, the sound more terrifying than any shout. "One more syllable about my daughter, and I will forget my laws and feed you to the feral dogs in the kennels. Slowly." Beep, beep, beep. The machine flashed a brilliant, undeniable green. Dr. Eris pulled the readout, his eyes scanning the data. He looked at Cyrus. He looked at Poppy, who was now quietly playing with a button on her coat. The old doctor's face transformed with awe. He bowed deeply. "Sire, a 99.9% genetic match. She is a pure-blood alpha heir. Her latent power signatures, they are unprecedented, off the charts. This explains the energy surge." Cyrus released Silas, who slumped to the floor, choking. The king took the paper. His eyes scanned the lines that legally, scientifically, made Poppy his. He wasn't looking at the proof anymore. He was looking at his daughter. Slowly, he went down on one knee, bringing himself to her level. "Hello?" he said, his voice thick, the word almost clumsy with emotion. Poppy looked up from her button, her honey eyes meeting his gold ones. "Hi, are you really my daddy?" "Yes," he breathed, the word a sacred vow. "Yes, I really am." "Do you have a castle?" she asked, tilting her head. "I do," he said, a real, genuine smile, small, tentative, but real, touching his lips for the first time in a decade. Silas scrambled to his feet, his face a mottled purple of rage and humiliation. "This machine is clearly faulty. I demand a second test, overseen by the council's own—" "Get out," Cyrus said, not even turning to look at him, his attention wholly on Poppy. "Get out of my sight before I forget my own laws." Silas fled, the door hissing shut behind him, but as it closed, Elara caught the look in his eyes. It wasn't defeat, it was the cold, calculated look of a man who had just moved to his next move, and it froze the fragile warmth in her heart solid. Chapter 4. The silence in the medical wing was profound after Silas's departure, broken only by the soft hum of machines and Poppy's quiet humming as she explored a shiny medical instrument Dr. Eris had given her to hold. The relief that had bloomed in Elara's chest at the test results was short-lived, instantly choked by the vine of dread Silas's final look had planted. Cyrus rose from his kneeling position, the simple movement radiating a new kind of power, not just the authority of a king, but the fierce protectiveness of a father. He turned to Elara, the gold in his eyes still bright, but softer now, tempered by a wonder she suspected mirrored her own. "This changes nothing for them," she whispered, hugging herself. "Silas, the council, they won't accept this. A test on your machine with your doctor? They'll call it coercion. They'll say you forced the result." "Let them talk," Cyrus said, but his jaw was tight. He understood the politics as well as she feared them. "The truth is in her blood. It's in your mark. But you're right. We cannot simply announce this. We need irrefutable, public proof. Proof that even the most corrupt councilman cannot whisper away." "What proof?" Elara asked, desperation creeping in. "What could be more absolute than a DNA test?"
"The Packstone," Cyrus stated, as if it were obvious. "At the solstice ceremony in 2 days' time, it is the heart of our oldest traditions. If a true, destined heir of the royal bloodline touches it, the stone awakens. It glows with a light that cannot be faked, a magic that predates politics and lies. If Poppy touches the stone and it reacts, no one, not Silas, not the entire conniving council, can deny her, or you." The solstice ceremony. Elara had heard of it, a distant spectacle for the elite, broadcast on screens in the city squares. The thought of walking into that arena, with all those eyes on her, on Poppy, it was terrifying. And if it doesn't glow? The question was a mere breath. Cyrus looked at Poppy, who was now trying to balance the instrument on her nose. A faint, genuine smile touched his lips again. "It will." His confidence was absolute. "But until then, you will be safe. I promise you that." Safe was a relative term. They were escorted not to a dungeon, but to the royal suite, a gilded cage at the very apex of the estate's central tower. The doors were solid, reinforced steel, the windows were sheets of impenetrable ballistic glass, and the air itself hummed with subtle security fields. The room was larger than the entire floor of her old apartment building, opulent and cold despite the roaring fire in the marble hearth. A bed the size of a small boat dominated the space, piled with silks and furs. Poppy, wide-eyed, had immediately declared it the best jumping castle ever, and her innocent joy was a stark, painful contrast to the fortress-like atmosphere. Elara stood by the fireplace, arms wrapped tightly around herself, wearing borrowed clothes, a simple, soft tunic of Cyrus's that swam on her, smelling faintly of sandalwood and crisp winter air. It was disconcertingly intimate. The door opened with a hushed whisper, and Cyrus entered. He had changed into dark, casual clothes, but the tension had not left his broad shoulders. It had merely shifted from the hunt to a watchful, simmering guard. "Is she asleep?" he asked, softly, his voice a low rumble in the vast room. "Finally," Elara replied, glancing at the bed where Poppy was a small, peaceful mound under the covers. "She thinks this is a grand adventure." "It is," Cyrus said, stepping closer. He stopped a respectful distance away, but his presence filled the space between them. "It's the start of her life, her real life, and yours." "For how long, Cyrus?" Elara turned to face him, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "How long until Silas finds a legal loophole, until the council decides a waitress from the slums isn't fit to be a queen, mark or no mark? How long until they take her from me?" The fear she had held back finally broke through, her voice cracking. "I didn't run and hide for 6 years because I wanted this life of politics and danger for her. I wanted her to be safe, ordinary." And was she? Cyrus's question was gentle, but it pierced her defenses. Was she safe in a cold room with broken locks? Was she safe when you had to work 2 jobs and leave her with strangers? Was she safe living a lie, denying the powerful little wolf she is beginning to become? He took a careful step forward. "You gave her survival, Elara. You are the bravest person I have ever known, but I can give her more. I can give her a home that is truly secure, a legacy, a father who would incinerate continents to keep her safe." He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and took her hand. He placed her palm flat against his chest, over his heart. The strong, steady rhythm pulsed against her skin, a powerful, living drumbeat. Thump, thump, thump. "I failed you," he whispered, the admission raw and heavy. "I failed you both 6 years ago. I let a monster whisper lies in your ear and send you into the dark. That failure will haunt me until my last breath, but let me fix it now. You have to trust me, not just the king, me, your wolf. Can't you feel it?" She could. Oh, goddess, she could. Since the moment his skin had touched hers in the alley, the constant hollow ache in her soul, the mate bond stretched to breaking point, had begun to mend. It was no longer a silent void. It was a warm, humming connection, a thread of gold lightning in her chest that pulled taut whenever he was near. When he touched her, a sense of rightness, of completion settled over her, quieting the panic that had been her constant companion for years. "I feel it," she admitted, the words a sacred confession. A profound relief softened the hard planes of his face. He leaned down, his eyes searching hers, asking a silent, profound question. This was not about passion, but connection, not possession, but promise. When she didn't retreat, he slowly, reverently bowed his head and pressed his forehead against hers once more. It was a gesture of unity, of pack, of mates. A silent vow passed between them in the quiet crackle of the fire. For a suspended moment, the threats outside the steel door ceased to exist. There was only the warmth, the steady beat of his heart under her hand, and the fragile, blossoming hope. Suddenly, without a sound, the room plunged into absolute darkness. The fire still burned, but every electric light died. A series of sharp electronic clicks echoed, the locks on the suite door disengaging. Cyrus broke away instantly, shoving Elara behind him with one powerful motion. His eyes ignited, twin golden beacons in the blackness. "Get down, stay with Poppy." The heavy door creaked open. Silhouetted against the dim emergency lighting of the hallway were 3 figures. They didn't wear council robes. They were clad in form-fitting tactical black, faces obscured by sleek masks, and in their hands were not ceremonial daggers, but matte black pistols, their barrels elongated with silencers. Silver-tipped bullets. Assassins, inside the most secure room in the kingdom.
"Leo!" Cyrus roared into the silent comms device in his cuff, but only static hissed back. The comms were dead. The lead assassin raised his weapon. Cyrus didn't wait. He didn't have time for the full, bone-rending shift. This was the combat shift of a battle-hardened alpha. A sickening, rapid series of snaps and tears echoed as claws, black and wickedly sharp, erupted from his fingertips. His canines lengthened, a feral snarl tearing from his throat. He moved faster than sight, a blur of lethal intent. He crossed the room before the assassin's finger could tighten on the trigger. A swipe of his clawed hand shattered the gun and sent the man flying into the hallway wall with a sickening crunch. The second assassin fired. Foot. Silenced shots shattered a crystal decanter inches from Elara's head. She screamed, diving to the floor and scrambling on her hands and knees toward the bed, throwing herself over Poppy's sleeping form. Cyrus took a bullet. A grunt of pain was ripped from him as silver burned into the meat of his shoulder. He didn't stagger. He became a whirlwind of fury, grabbing the second assassin and hurling him with such force into the bulletproof window that the reinforced glass webbed with cracks, the man's body slumping, broken to the floor. The third assassin, seeing his comrades fall in seconds, turned to flee, but he didn't make it to the door. A figure stepped calmly out of the shadows of the hallway, a woman in the simple dove-gray dress of a senior housemaid, holding a silver tea tray. It was Lydia, the head of household staff, a woman who had served the Blackwood family with quiet efficiency for 2 decades. With a flick of her wrist, as casual as serving scones, she flung the entire heavy tray. A steak knife from the setting buried itself to the hilt in the fleeing assassin. He collapsed with a shriek. The lights flickered back on, blindingly bright. Cyrus stood panting in the center of the wreckage, blood oozing darkly from his shoulder, his claws slowly retracting. He looked at Lydia, confusion warring with gratitude on his face. Lydia... Good throw. Lydia didn't smile. Her normally placid face was a mask of cold resolve. She walked over to the writhing assassin, kicked his gun away, and then turned her icy gaze on Cyrus. "I didn't do it for you," she spat, her voice utterly devoid of its usual warmth. She pulled a small disc-like device from her apron pocket and pressed a button. A high-pitched, shrieking frequency exploded through the room. It was a sound beyond normal hearing, a sonic weapon designed to attack the hypersensitive auditory nerves of werewolves. Cyrus cried out, dropping to his knees, his hands clawing at his ears as agony contorted his features. Elara screamed, the sound drilling into her own skull, a white-hot nail of pain. On the bed, Poppy awoke, shrieking in terror and pain. Lydia stepped over Cyrus's convulsing body. She wasn't looking at the king. Her target was the bed. She pulled a syringe from her pocket, filled with a viscous, glowing blue liquid that pulsed with a malevolent light. "Wolfsbane," she said calmly, as if commenting on the weather. "Concentrated, a gift from Councilman Silas, enough to stop a little heart forever." She moved toward the bed, the syringe poised. Cyrus was helpless, paralyzed by the sonic assault, his alpha strength useless against the technological torment. But Elara wasn't. The pain was a distant echo. All she saw was a threat to her child. With a mother's fury that transcended species, fear, and pain, she lunged. Her hand closed around the heavy iron poker from the fireplace hearth. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She swung. Crack! The solid iron connected with Lydia's temple with a dreadful final sound. The housemaid's eyes rolled back, the sonic device clattered to the floor, its dreadful shriek cutting off abruptly. The syringe dropped from her limp fingers, rolling away, its blue glow extinguished against the rug. Lydia crumpled, unconscious. Silence rushed back in, broken only by Poppy's frightened whimpers and Cyrus's ragged, pained gasps as he pushed himself up from the floor. He shook his head, blood trickling from one ear. He looked at Lydia's still form. Then his gaze, wide with shock and dawning ferocious pride, lifted to Elara. She stood over the fallen traitor, chest heaving, the iron poker still gripped in her white-knuckled hands, raised like the sword of an avenging angel. Her eyes blazed not with gold, but with a fire all her own. A slow, bloody smile spread across Cyrus's face. "You," he rasped, the word filled with awe and a love so sudden and deep it shook him. "You are unquestionably my Luna." Chapter 5. The silence following the attack was heavier than the darkness had been. It was a thick, ringing void, punctuated by Poppy's frightened whimpers and Cyrus's labored breathing as he clutched his bleeding shoulder. Elara stood frozen, the weight of the violence in her trembling hands. The reality of what she had done, the violent crack, the way Lydia had fallen, washed over her in a cold, sickening wave. She dropped the poker with a clatter that echoed in the vast room. Cyrus was on his feet in an instant, ignoring his own wound. In 2 strides, he was at the bed, gathering a sobbing Poppy into his arms. "Shh, little star, you're safe. I've got you." His voice was a rough but gentle murmur, a stark contrast to the beast of moments before. He looked over the child's head at Elara, his golden eyes holding hers. "Are you hurt?" Elara could only shake her head, mute. Her eyes were locked on Lydia's prone form. The door burst open, this time with Leo and a squad of guards, their faces etched with panic and fury. "Alpha, the security feed was looped, we didn't see." Leo's words died as he took in the scene, the shattered glass, the fallen assassins, the king holding his daughter, and the queen standing guard over a traitor. "Secure the room," Cyrus commanded, his voice back to its steely authority. "Check them." He nodded to the assassins. 2 guards moved quickly, checking for pulses. "This one's alive," one of them said, nudging the man with the knife in the leg. "Take him to the black cells. I will question him myself." Cyrus's tone promised that the interrogation would be unforgettable. His eyes then fell on Lydia, and her. Restrain her. Use silver. As guards moved to comply, Lydia groaned, consciousness returning. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with confusion that quickly hardened into defiance when she saw Cyrus. She spat blood onto the exquisite rug. "Why, Lydia?"
Cyrus asked, the question quiet, more pained than angry. 20 years you served my family. Served? I was a slave to your bloodline. My daughter, my Elara, was cast out from the pack for loving a human. She died in the cold, and your father's law did nothing. Her venomous gaze shifted to Elara.
And then she appears. A nobody, a kitchen maid, given the title of Luna, bearing a child who would be heir while my bloodline is considered dirt? She struggled against the silver cuffs now binding her wrists, her face contorted with hatred. Silas offered a better world, a world where worth is not determined by a mark on your skin. He promised my granddaughter a place in the new order. All I had to do was open one door. The confession hung in the air, a tragedy woven into the betrayal. Cyrus's face was stone. Your grievance was with a dead king and an unjust law. Your vengeance was taken on an innocent woman and a child. There is no new order that is built on the blood of children, Lydia. Take her away. As Lydia was dragged out, still hurling curses, Cyrus turned to Leo. The comms were jammed, the security looped. This was an inside operation, but it required outside coordination. Silas may have given the order, but he doesn't have the resources for this kind of tactical strike. Agreed, Leo said, his face grim. We found this on Lydia. He held up the small sonic device. Military grade, not council issue. Cyrus's mind raced, the pieces clicking together with cold, dreadful clarity. Silas provides the political cover, the lies, the access, but he needs muscle, someone with soldiers, with weapons, with a motive to see my line ended. He looked at Elara, who had finally moved, coming to stand beside him, her hand instinctively finding Poppy's back. The northern border, he said. Alpha Magnus. Leo's eyes widened. Your cousin? He's always believed the throne should have passed to him after your father. Magnus commands the Northern Legions. He has the hardware, the loyalists, and with Silas controlling the narrative in the capital, Cyrus's jaw tightened. They weren't just trying to kill us tonight. They were trying to erase us before the solstice, before Poppy could be presented to the stone. Elara felt the floor drop away. You think they'll try again before the ceremony? I know they will, Cyrus stated. He looked at the ruined room, at his wounded shoulder, at the fear still lingering in his daughter's eyes. A cold, calculated resolve settled over him, burning away the last traces of shock. So we don't give them a target. What do you mean? Elara asked. We disappear, Cyrus said. Right now, not as fugitives, as ghosts. 30 minutes later, a decoy motorcade with darkened windows swept out of the estate's main gates, heading for the safe house in the western woods. Every spy and traitor watching would report the king was on the move. But beneath the estate, in a hidden hangar carved into the bedrock, a different kind of vehicle was being prepared. It wasn't a limousine or an armored car. It was a rugged, matte black all-terrain transport built for stealth and speed, not show. Cyrus, his shoulder now expertly bandaged by Dr. Eris, helped Elara and a sleepy, confused Poppy into the back compartment, which was lined with secure seating and stocked with supplies. We're going on another adventure, little star, he told Poppy, buckling her in himself. A secret one. Like spies? Poppy whispered, a flicker of interest cutting through her exhaustion. Exactly like spies, Cyrus confirmed with a small smile. Elara sat stiffly beside him as the vehicle powered up with a near-silent hum. Leo took the driver's seat. The northern route is the most direct, but it's also the most predictable. It goes right through Magnus's territory. So we don't take it, Cyrus said, pulling up a holographic map. We go east through the Silverwood Pass. It's treacherous, longer, and hasn't been used for royal travel in a century. No one will expect it. The pass is narrow, exposed in places, and prone to avalanches at this time of year, Leo warned.
It is also the only route they won't have mined or ambushed, Cyrus countered. We travel fast, we travel quiet, we reach the grove from the rear before the ceremony's main procession arrives. The plan was audacious, dangerous. It meant days of hard travel through unforgiving wilderness instead of a comfortable, guarded procession. Elara looked at Poppy, then at Cyrus's set, determined profile. He was choosing the path that protected them, not the one that upheld royal ceremony. It was the first true sign of the father and mate he was determined to be. As the transport slid out of the hidden tunnel and into the snowy, moonlit light, leaving the glittering cage of the estate behind, Elara felt a strange sense of relief. Out here, the threats were wolves and weather, not smiling councilmen and traitorous maids. Out here, with the pine trees standing sentinel and the vast starlit sky overhead, the elaborate lies of the capital felt distant. She watched Cyrus check the instruments, his focus absolute, his presence a solid anchor in the rushing darkness. Poppy fell asleep against her side. After a long while, Cyrus spoke, his voice low. "I never asked you," he said, not taking his eyes from the terrain ahead. "Her name. You named her Poppy." Elara threaded her fingers through her daughter's soft curls. "It was the only beautiful thing in the room the day she was born, a little painted poppy on a cracked windowsill. It was stubborn. It had no right to be there in all that gray, but it was, and it was vibrant, and it gave me hope." She paused. "Her full name is Poppy Elara." Cyrus was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick. "It's perfect." He glanced back at them, his golden eyes soft in the dashboard lights. "Get some rest, both of you. The real journey begins at dawn." As Elara leaned back, allowing herself to close her eyes, the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the tires on the frozen ground became a lullaby. For the first time since that snowy festival, the fear wasn't gone, but it was shared, and in the shared burden there was a fragile, burgeoning strength. They were no longer just running, they were navigating, together, toward a destiny that was theirs to claim. Chapter 6. The Silverwood Pass was not a road. It was a scar carved through the heart of the mountains by ancient glaciers, a narrow, winding track of jagged rock and ice that clung precariously to sheer cliffs. Dawn broke not with gentle color, but with a harsh gray light that did little to warm the deep shadows in the gorge below. Their stealthy transport, now in a rugged off-road mode, crawled along the ledge, its tires finding purchase on ground that seemed to shift with every gust of wind. Elara watched, her heart in her throat, as Leo navigated a turn where the outside wheels spun mere inches from a drop that fell away into nothingness. Poppy mercifully was asleep again, wrapped in a thermal blanket and secured in her seat. Cyrus sat in the front passenger seat, his body tense, his eyes constantly scanning the high rock walls above them. He was a king in exile, but here, in this primordial landscape, he seemed more at home, a primal alpha in his element, every sense extended to detect threat.
"They won't look for us here," Cyrus said, more to himself than to anyone. "Magnus will have every patrol, every drone focused on the northern road. Arrogance always blinds a man to the paths he deems beneath him." "Let's hope his arrogance holds," Leo muttered, wrestling the steering wheel as they hit a patch of black ice. The vehicle slid sideways with a sickening lurch before the tires gripped again. They drove in tense silence for hours, the only sounds the growl of the engine, the crunch of ice, and the moan of the wind through the pass. The isolation was absolute, a double-edged sword. No ambush awaited them here, but if they broke down or had an accident, no one would find them until the spring thaw, if ever. As the sun reached its feeble peak, they entered a slightly wider section of the pass, where the rock walls opened up to reveal a frozen river far below and a stand of ancient silver-barked pines that gave the pass its name. Cyrus held up a hand. Stop here. We need to check the bearings, let the engine cool, and we all need to move. Leo brought the vehicle to a halt in the shelter of a massive overhang. The sudden silence was deafening. Elara helped a groggy Poppy out into the crisp, thin air. The little girl blinked, taking in the towering walls of stone and ice. "Are we on the moon?" "Almost, little star," Cyrus said, kneeling to check her coat. His large hands were surprisingly deft as he zipped it up to her chin. "Stay close to me, all right? The ground is tricky." They stretched their legs, the men checking the vehicle while Elara took Poppy a few careful steps away to look at the intricate frost patterns on the rocks. The sheer scale of the mountains was humbling, reducing her human fears to a mere whisper in the vast, ancient quiet. For a moment, it was peaceful. The attack came not from the cliffs, but from the sky. A low, mechanical whine, utterly alien in the natural silence, pierced the air. Cyrus's head snapped up. "Drone! Leo, get them back in the—" Too late. A small, sleek drone, painted in Arctic camouflage, zipped over the ridge above them. It didn't fire weapons. Instead, a blinding, strobing light erupted from it, accompanied by the same high-pitched sonic shriek Lydia had used, but amplified, broadcasted across the entire gorge. Poppy screamed, clapping her hands over her ears. Elara cried out, the sound feeling like needles driving into her brain. Leo stumbled, swearing. Cyrus roared in fury and pain, his eyes squinting against the blinding light. The drone was a spotter, a hunter. It wasn't here to kill them. It was here to cripple them, to point-pin their location. "Get down," Cyrus bellowed, fighting through the disorientation. He grabbed a rifle from the vehicle, but shooting a small, fast-moving drone in a rocky, echoing canyon while half-deafened was nearly impossible. He fired once, twice. The shots echoed like thunder, but the drone danced evasively. Then, from further up the pass, around a bend they hadn't yet reached, came the sound they had dreaded. Engines, not their quiet electric hum, but the throaty roar of heavy snowmobiles and modified off-road bikes. Magnus had found them, not through the main road, but because someone had given them eyes in the sky, someone with access to their secret route. "Traitor!" Leo gasped, still wincing against the sonic attack. "There's a traitor in the security room back at the estate. They knew which decoy to ignore." It didn't matter now. They were cornered in a stone bowl with a cliff at their back and enemies closing in from the only exit. Cyrus made a split-second decision. "The river," he shouted over the shrieking drone. "The ice, it's our only chance." "The ice won't hold the vehicle," Leo yelled back. "We're not taking the vehicle." Cyrus slammed the rifle back into its rack. "We go on foot, now. Elara, carry Poppy. Leo, grab the emergency packs." He didn't wait for debate. He yanked open the back of the transport, hauling out 2 heavy survival packs and throwing one to Leo. He grabbed a third smaller one, slinging it over his good shoulder. Then he turned to Elara. "Follow me. Do exactly as I do. Step only where I step." The drone's light followed them as they scrambled down a steep, scree-covered slope toward the frozen river below. The sonic whine was a relentless predator at their heels. Behind them, the first of Magnus's scouts roared into view on the ledge they had just vacated, shouting to one another. The ice river was a wide, milky blue plain, crisscrossed with darker lines where the current still flowed beneath. It groaned ominously under their weight as they reached it. Cyrus didn't slow. He moved with a strange, skating gait, distributing his weight. "Quickly, but don't run. Glide." Elara mimicked him, clutching Poppy, who had buried her face in her neck, sobbing silently. The child's terror was a cold knife in Elara's heart, sharper than the mountain air. Leo brought up the rear, his weapon drawn, scanning the ridge above. They were halfway across the frozen expanse when the first shot rang out. A bullet sparked off the ice 10 feet to their left, then another. The scouts were shooting from the ridge. "Faster," Cyrus urged, his voice a command that broke no argument. Elara pushed her legs to move, her breaths coming ragged, painful gasps. The ice groaned louder, a deep, cracking protest. A dark fissure zigzagged ahead of them. Cyrus altered course without breaking stride, leaping over the widening crack in a single powerful bound. He turned, arm outstretched. Elara, now, jump! She didn't think. She adjusted her grip on Poppy, took 2 running steps, and jumped. Her foot slipped on the edge. For a heart-stopping second, she was falling backward. Cyrus's hand shot out, clamping around her forearm with bruising strength, hauling her and Poppy to safety on the other side. Leo followed just as the section of ice they had been standing on broke away with the sound like a cannon shot, tumbling into the black, rushing water below. They had reached the far bank, scrambling up into the relative cover of the pine forest on the other side. The drone, its range limited, hovered angrily at the river's edge, but didn't follow. The scouts on the opposite ridge were too far for accurate shots now, but they were shouting, pointing. They would find a way across. Cyrus didn't stop. This way, he panted, leading them deeper into the thick, snowy woods. For 2 hours they pushed on, the silence of the forest now a welcome cloak. The only sounds were their own labored breathing, the crunch of snow, and the distant, fading whine of the drone. Finally, when Poppy was trembling with cold and exhaustion, Cyrus halted in a small, sheltered clearing surrounded by dense fir trees. "We rest here." Briefly, he shrugged off the packs, his face grim. He looked at Elara, at the frost in her hair and the fear in her eyes.
He looked at Poppy, who was now listless and too quiet. His expression hardened, not with anger at them, but with a furious, cold purpose. They tracked us through the pass. They knew, which means the rot goes deeper than we thought. We cannot go to the grove as planned. They will be waiting. "Then what do we do?" Elara asked, her voice a dry rasp. "We can't go back. We can't go forward." Cyrus knelt, opening the smaller pack he had carried. He pulled out a compact satellite communicator, a device reserved for extreme emergencies. "We change the game," he said, his golden eyes glinting in the dim forest light. "We don't run to the stone. We make the stone come to us." Chapter 7. The cold in the clearing was a living thing, seeping through layers of clothing and gnawing at bone. Cyrus worked quickly, his breath pluming in the still air as he sent the coded burst transmission via the satellite device. The message was cryptic, secure, and pointed to only one person he trusted absolutely. Then he powered the unit down, its faint green light winking out, leaving them in the deep blue gloom of the forest twilight. "We cannot stay here," he said, his voice low. "They will send trackers, wolf trackers. We need to move, and we need to break our scent." Elara nodded, her arms wrapped around a shivering Poppy. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a hollow, trembling exhaustion. "Where can we go? They'll have the roads, the towns." "Not a town," Cyrus said, shouldering the packs again. He pointed northeast, where the mountains rose even more steeply. "There is a place, a sanctuary built by my great-grandfather, a hunting lodge, forgotten by most. It is off-grid, stocked, and," he looked at Poppy, "it has a fireplace." The promise of warmth was a powerful motivator. They set off again, moving slower now, conserving energy. Cyrus led them along a deer trail that skirted the edge of a frozen waterfall, then up a treacherous slope where they had to use roots and rocks as handholds. He helped Elara at every difficult pass, his grip strong and sure. He carried Poppy on his back for a long stretch, the little girl's arms locked around his neck, her face pressed into the warmth of his jacket. As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner and colder, but a strange peace descended. The world below, with its politics and betrayals, seemed like a distant dream.
Here, there was only survival, one careful step after another, and the shared, unspoken goal of shelter. Just as the last of the daylight bled from the sky, staining the snow violet, they saw it. Nestled in a high alpine meadow, sheltered by a horseshoe of rock, was a lodge. It was built from massive logs, its roof thick with snow, smoke curling from a stone chimney. A light glowed warmly in a front window. Elara stopped, a new fear lancing through her. Someone's there. They're supposed to be, Cyrus said, a note of profound relief in his voice. He put 2 fingers to his lips and let out a specific, 3-toned whistle. A moment later, the heavy wooden door creaked open. A figure stood silhouetted against the firelight, tall, broad-shouldered, holding a hunting rifle with casual competence. "Took you long enough. Get in here before you freeze solid." As they trudged the final distance, the figure resolved into an older man, his hair steel gray, his face a map of wrinkles earned from wind and sun, but his eyes were a sharp, intelligent blue. He wore simple, practical woodsman's clothes. "Elara, Poppy, this is Elias," he said as they reached the porch. "He was my combat instructor. Now he is my contingency plan." Elias's keen eyes swept over Elara and Poppy, noting their exhaustion, their fear, but also the way Cyrus positioned himself protectively near them. A slow smile touched his weathered face. "So the rumors are true. Come in, come in. The kettle's on." The inside of the lodge was a revelation. It was rustic, but far from primitive. A huge stone fireplace dominated the main room, a roaring fire crackling within. The furniture was sturdy and comfortable, shelves were lined with books and preserved food, and the air smelled of wood smoke, pine, and stew. It was a sanctuary, a fortress of warmth and safety. Elias ushered Poppy to the hearth, wrapping her in a thick wool blanket and pressing her a mug of warm honey-sweetened milk into her hands. The little girl, overwhelmed, simply stared into the flames, the warmth slowly bringing color back to her cheeks. "Magnus?" Elias asked, his voice dropping as he handed Cyrus a mug of strong black tea. "And Silas," Cyrus confirmed, warming his hands on the mug. They coordinated. They knew about the pass. Someone in my inner security circle sold us out. Elias nodded grimly. "The message said you're changing the game. How?" Cyrus looked into the fire, the flames reflecting in his golden eyes. "The solstice ceremony is in 36 hours. Magnus will be there, expecting to either intercept us or, if he believes us dead, to claim the stone for himself. He will have the full Northern Legion with him, disguised as honor guards. Silas will control the narrative in the capital, declaring a tragedy and pushing for Magnus's ascension." "So we don't go to the ceremony?" Elara said, joining them, her own mug cradled close. "We do," Cyrus said, turning to her, "but not as supplicants, not as targets. We go as the storm." He looked at Elias. "You still have the echo?" Elias's blue eyes gleamed. "Operational and hidden 5 miles from the sacred grove, just like you ordered all those years ago, just in case." "What's the echo?" Elara asked. "A mobile command and surveillance post, armored, stealth-capable, with long-range communications and surveillance. It was my father's paranoid project. Now it's our advantage. We use it to get close, to see everything. And then," he took a deep breath, "then we use the one thing Magnus and Silas have overlooked in their quest for power." "What's that?" Elara whispered. "The people," Cyrus said simply. "The Omegas, the unranked, the families in the public square. They are not invested in blood purity or noble politics. They care about peace, stability, and a leader who protects them. They saw you at the festival, Elara. They saw Poppy. The story of the little girl and the king has already spread through the kingdom like wildfire. Silas has been trying to suppress it, but he can't kill a story that beautiful. He looked at her, his gaze intense. We don't just prove your lineage to the nobles, we show it to the pack. All of it. The mark, the bond, the truth of Silas's lies. We broadcast it, from the echo, to every screen in the kingdom, right in the middle of their carefully staged ceremony. The audacity of the plan took Elara's breath away.
It was a direct, public challenge, bypassing all the corrupt intermediaries. It was dangerous, exposing them utterly, but it was also just. And the stone, Poppy touching it? That will be the finale, Cyrus said, a fierce light in his eyes. But first, we tear down their stage around them. Elias chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. Always did prefer a direct approach. I'll prep the echo. You all need to rest. You look like death warmed over. He nodded toward a hallway. There are 2 rooms in the back. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we start a war. That night, tucked under heavy quilts in a small, simple bedroom with Poppy sleeping deeply beside her, Elara stared at the ceiling. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But alongside it was something new, a spark of defiant hope. Cyrus wasn't just hiding or reacting, he was crafting a counterattack, one that fought lies with truth. She thought of his hand, warm and steady, pulling her from the cracking ice. He was a king, yes, but in these mountains, in this lodge, he was something more fundamental, a protector, a strategist, a man fighting for his family. A soft knock sounded on the door. It opened slightly, and Cyrus stood there, a shadow against the firelight from the main room. I'm standing watch with Elias. Is everything all right? Elara sat up. Yes, thank you, for this place. For him. Cyrus nodded. He taught me that true strength isn't in never falling, it's in who you trust to help you back up. He hesitated. Sleep, Elara. Tomorrow requires all of us at our strongest. He began to close the door. Cyrus? She called out quietly. He paused. We will be, she said. Strong enough. In the dim light, she saw his smile, a faint but real curve of his lips. I know, he whispered, and then the door closed, leaving her in the dark, with the embers of hope glowing steadily brighter than any fear. Chapter 8. Dawn at the high-altitude lodge was a silent, crystalline affair. The world was painted in shades of blue and white, the only sound the crackle of the rekindled fire and the soft snores from the bedroom. Cyrus had not slept. He stood at a heavy wooden table with Elias, studying a topographical map of the sacred grove and its surroundings. Red marks denoted Magnus's likely troop placements, based on patrol patterns and the old northerners' predictable tactics. He'll have snipers here and here, Elias grunted, tapping 2 ridges overlooking the main approach. His personal guard will be clustered near the stone platform. The bulk of his forces will be concealed in the tree line, ready to restore order if any loyalists to you cause trouble. Which Silas will have labeled as rogue agitators, Cyrus finished, his voice cold. They want a provocation. They want an excuse to purge. Elias nodded. The echo is here. He pointed to a spot deep within a dense thicket of ironwood trees, a natural blind. Close enough for visuals, far enough to be off their seismic scanners. The uplink is ready. I've patched into the ceremonial broadcast feed. When you give the signal, we override it. Every public screen, every private comm will show our feed. Good. Cyrus's eyes were hard. The moment of override must be precise. It must be when Silas is at his most grandiose, when Magnus is at his most confident. We let them hang themselves with their own words first. The bedroom door opened, and Elara emerged, leading a sleepy-eyed Poppy. The little girl was wrapped in a blanket, her curls a wild halo. She saw Cyrus and offered a tiny, tentative wave. This simple gesture sent a fierce, protective love through him so strong it was almost painful.
"We have a plan," he said to Elara, his voice gentling, "but it requires your trust, and," he looked at Poppy, "it requires her at the very end." Elara's grip on Poppy's hand tightened instinctively. "What do you need her to do?" "She needs to be seen," Cyrus said, coming around the table. He crouched before Poppy. "Little star, remember the big, shiny rock from the story? The one that lights up?" Poppy nodded slowly. "The moon rock?" "Yes, that rock is in a big, big field with lots of people. I need to take you to see it, but to get there, we have to play a very quiet, very sneaky game, like the best spies. Can you be my super sneaky spy?" Poppy's eyes widened with solemn importance. "I can be whisper quiet," she promised in a dramatic whisper. Cyrus's heart clenched. "I know you can." He looked up at Elara. "We'll be in the Echo, a safe, armored vehicle, until the very last moment. Elias will stay with you both there. I will go ahead to clear the path." "No," Elara said immediately, the word sharp. "You can't go out there alone. It's what they want." "It's what they expect," he corrected, standing. "They expect the Alpha King to arrive with fanfare or to be dragged in as a prisoner. They do not expect a single wolf using the land as his ally. I know the Grove's hidden paths, its blind spots, better than Nagnus ever will. I need to be on the ground to coordinate, to disable their jammers, to ensure the path to the stone is open when the time comes." He took her hand, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. "My first and only mission is to get you and Poppy to that stone safely. This is how I do it. Trust my strategy as I trust your courage." The faith he placed in her was as terrifying as it was empowering. He searched his face, seeing no recklessness, only the calm, unwavering certainty of a master tactician. This was his domain, the battlefield. She swallowed her fear and nodded. "All right, but you come back. You come back to us." "I swear it on my life," he vowed, the words an oath carved in stone. The journey to the Echo was made in the freezing pre-dawn hours, using a camouflaged snow crawler Elias kept in a hidden shed. It was a slow, jarring ride through untouched forests, but it left no clear trail. The Echo itself was a marvel of outdated but impeccably maintained technology, a hulking, low-slung vehicle, coated in light-absorbing matte black, hidden beneath a canopy of netting and branches. Inside, it was a cramped maze of flickering screens, humming servers, and old-fashioned leather seats. Elias took the command chair, his gnarled hands moving over the controls with practiced ease. Settling in, we have eyes. Screens flickered to life, showing grainy black and white feeds from hidden cameras Elias had positioned days earlier. They had a panoramic view of the sacred grove. It was a breathtaking natural amphitheater. At its center stood the Pax Stone, a monolith of pure black obsidian, twice the height of a man, etched with ancient runes. Around it, wooden stands were filling with the Pax elite, their fine robes and furs a splash of color against the snow.
Guards in northern colors were everywhere, their posture too rigid, their eyes scanning the crowd not for threats to it, but for dissent within it. And there, on a raised dais beside the stone, stood Magnus. He was a bear of a man, with a red beard and cold, calculating eyes. He preened in ceremonial armor, accepting obeisance from arriving alphas. Beside him, in council robes, stood Silas, his face a mask of pious solemnity as he spoke to a cluster of elders, no doubt spinning his tale of tragedy and necessary succession. Elara watched the screens, her stomach churning. They looked so legitimate, so in control. Poppy, fascinated by the blinking lights, sat on Elias's lap, asking quiet questions about the TVs.
Cyrus stood by the rear hatch, dressed now in nondescript thermal blacks, his face streaked with subtle camouflage paint. He looked less like a king and more like a phantom. He checked his equipment, a compact comm set, a few small specialized tools, no weapons. His weapons were his claws and his wits. "The main broadcast will begin in 1 hour," Elias said, not looking away from his screens. "The invocation. Magnus will touch the stone then, a symbolic gesture for the cameras, claiming it. That's your window, boy. The jammers are at the base of the 2 eastern pylons. Old design. You know the bypass." "I do," Cyrus said. He turned to Elara. He didn't speak. He simply looked at her, his golden eyes saying everything. Then he looked at Poppy. "Be brave for your mother, little spy." Then he was gone, the hatch sealing behind him with a soft hiss, leaving them in the tense electronic silence of the echo. Time became a slow, torturous drip. Elara watched the screens, her eyes straining for any sign of Cyrus in the shifting shadows of the grove. She saw Magnus's growing impatience, his glances toward the main entrance. He was waiting for news of an ambush or a captured king. The sun climbed and the ceremony began. A horn sounded, deep and mournful. The crowd fell silent. Cyrus stepped forward, his voice amplified by hidden microphones, smooth and sorrowful as it washed over the grove and, via broadcast, the entire kingdom. "Packmates, we gather under a sky of sorrow. Our beloved Alpha King Cyrus Blackwood is lost to us, taken by cowards in the night." He spun his lie with elegant poison, painting Cyrus as a martyr and the false mate and fabricated heir as a sinister plot finally thwarted. He spoke of stability, of legacy, of the strong hand of Alpha Magnus. Elara listened, her hands clenched into fists, nails biting into her palms. To hear her life, her love for her daughter twisted into something vile, it ignited a fury that burned away her last traces of doubt. On screen, Magnus stepped forward, chest puffed out, to lay his hand on the packstone. This was the moment, the fraudulent claim. "Elias, now!" Elara said, her voice surprisingly steady. Elias didn't hesitate. His hand slammed down on a large red button. "Feed is live. We have control." On the public screens across the kingdom, Silas's solemn face flickered and dissolved. It was replaced by the clear, close-up image of Elara's face, her honey whiskey eyes blazing with a truth that could not be denied. The audio from the grove cut out, replaced by her voice, clear and strong. "My name," she said, "is not Lena, it is Elara, and everything Councilman Silas just told you is a lie." Chapter 9. The silence in the grove was absolute, broken only by the gasp of 10,000 throats. On the dais, Magnus's hand froze an inch from the obsidian stone. Silas whirled, his face a comic mask of shock, searching for the source of the voice that now echoed from the ceremonial speakers, his speakers. Elara's face, projected 50 feet high on the temporary screens erected for the crowd, held the nation captive. She spoke not with a queen's practiced grace, but with a mother's raw, undeniable truth. 6 years ago, at the masquerade gala, I met my fated mate. I bore his mark upon my skin, and he bore mine. But when I went to the High Council for guidance, for help, I was met not with truth, but with poison. Elara's gaze seemed to pierce through the camera, directly at Silas. Councilman Silas told me my mate would reject me. He told me my child would be seen as a stain on the royal line. He told me that if I ever came forward, we would both be killed. So I ran, I hid, I became a ghost to protect my daughter. In the echo, Elias expertly cut the feed to a pre-recorded image, a close-up, verified scan of the mate mark on Elara's shoulder, the silver crescent and star glowing faintly. A collective murmur, this time of awe, rippled through the crowd. Back to Elara's live image. The man I met that night was Alpha King Cyrus Blackwood. Another cut, a fleeting, secure image from the estate's medical database, the side-by-side comparison of Cyrus's and Poppy's DNA sequences, the 99.9% flashing prominently. This is our daughter, Poppy, his heir, not a fabrication, not a political tool, his child. The broadcast then split the screen. On one side, Elara, on the other, a live feed from a hidden camera in the grove, showing Magnus and Silas on the dais, their faces now pale with dawning horror. The contrast was devastating. Serene, truthful mother versus the panicking, exposed conspirators. Elara's voice continued echoing across the land. They lied to you. They lied to keep the throne empty for a puppet. They sent assassins to kill a king in the wilderness. They tried to murder a little girl in her bed. Is this the strength you want? Is this the purity they promise? A purity built on the blood of children? In the grove, chaos erupted, not the violent chaos Magnus had hoped to quell, but a rising tide of outrage. The common pack members in the outer stands, who had always been suspicious of Silas's slick words, began to shout. Cries of shame and traitors began to ring out. The northern guards looked uneasily at each other, their orders unprepared for this, a war of truth, not steel. Magnus, his face purple with rage, finally found his voice. Sorcery! It is a trick, a desperate trick by the Rogue Alliance. He grabbed the ceremonial microphone, but his voice was drowned out by the boos of the crowd and the continuing calm narration from Elara's broadcast. "Where is your proof, woman?" Silas shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the screens. "Where is the king? If he lives, why is he not here?" It was the cue Cyrus had been waiting for. All at once, the powerful jammers at the base of the eastern pylons shorted out in a shower of sparks, and from the dense tree line at the rear of the amphitheater, from the direction no one was watching, a figure emerged. He walked alone, no guard, no fanfare, dressed in simple dark clothing, streaked with dirt and grime, his shoulder bandaged visibly beneath his jacket. He was not the pristine, distant king from the portraits. He was a warrior returned from battle, and in his eyes burned the cold, righteous fire of an alpha defending his own. The crowd near the back saw him first. A wave of silence rolled forward, followed by a growing, thunderous roar. "The king! The king lives!" Cyrus ignored the adulation. His golden eyes were fixed on the dais. He walked through the parting crowd, his stride long and purposeful, a predator finally revealing himself to his prey. Magnus stumbled back a step, his hand going to the sword at his hip. "Kill him!" he roared to his personal guards. "He is an imposter!" But the guards hesitated. They saw the mark of the Alpha in Cyrus's glowing gaze, felt the crushing weight of his aura as he drew nearer. This was no imposter. Cyrus reached the base of the dais. He didn't climb the steps. He simply looked up at Magnus, his voice cutting through the din without need of a microphone, powered by Alpha command. "You challenged my mate. You threatened my child. You betrayed your blood and your pack." He slowly, deliberately began to roll up his sleeves. "I accepted your challenge, Magnus, the blood duel you so wisely avoided in my courtyard. I claim it now, here, before our people, for the throne." A blood duel, issued not in shadow, but in the blazing light of truth, before the entire nation. There was no escaping it. To refuse was to confess cowardice and guilt before all. Magnus's eyes darted to Silas, who looked like he wanted to melt into the stone. He saw his northern legions, their loyalty wavering under the glaring spotlight of treason. He saw the pack, their eyes now on him, demanding answer. He had no choice. With a snarl of desperate fury, Magnus ripped his ceremonial cloak away, drawing his broadsword. "So be it! I should have ended your line years ago." Cyrus didn't draw a weapon. He simply shifted. It was not the full dramatic transformation, but the same combat shift from the suite, the eruption of black claws, the lengthening of fangs, a partial unleashing of the primal beast within. He didn't need a sword. He was the weapon. The duel began not with a clash, but with a charge. Magnus, bigger, heavier, swung his sword in a mighty arc meant to cleave Cyrus in two. Cyrus didn't block. He flowed under the swing, his claws leaving 4 deep gashes across Magnus's armored thigh. Magnus bellowed in pain, stumbling. It was not a fight of strength against strength. It was a masterclass in lethal efficiency against brute force. Cyrus was a shadow, a razor-edged wind. He dodged, weaved, and struck with pinpoint precision. Each slash of his claws was surgical, weakening tendons, drawing blood, sapping Magnus's overwhelming power. He was dismantling him, piece by prideful piece. Elara watched from the screen inside the echo, her hand clamped over her mouth, Poppy's face buried against her side. It was brutal, terrifying, and necessary. This was the law of their world, the final, brutal arbiter of truth. Magnus, driven mad by pain and humiliation, made a final reckless lunge. Cyrus saw the opening. He didn't take it to kill. As the sword thrust past him, he lunged forward, not with his claws, but with his body. He slammed his shoulder into Magnus's chest, driving the air from his lungs. At the same moment, his clawed hand shot out and closed around Magnus's sword wrist. Crack! The sound of breaking bone was sickeningly loud. Magnus's scream was cut short as Cyrus delivered a single, devastating punch to his jaw. The northern alpha crumpled, unconscious, to the blood-spattered snow at the foot of the sacred stone. Silence. Absolute. Cyrus stood over his fallen cousin, chest heaving, his claws retracting. He turned his golden gaze not to the crowd, but to the hidden camera he knew was watching, to the echo, to Elara. His voice, ragged but clear, rang out. The challenge is met. The throne is secure. He then turned his terrifying focus on Silas, who was trying to shrink behind the stone. Councilman Silas, you are accused of treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and subversion of the royal bloodline. Do you deny it? Silas, seeing Magnus broken, seeing the crowd's hateful stare, had no lies left. He fell to his knees, sobbing, "Mercy! I was misled! Magnus threatened me!" Your lies threatened my family. You threatened the future of this pack. There is no mercy for that. He nodded to Leo, who had materialized from the crowd with a squad of true royal guards. Take him. His fate will be decided by a tribunal of the people he sought to deceive. It was over. The coup was shattered in the light of day. Cyrus, bleeding and weary, stood victorious. But he wasn't finished. He looked back to the camera, to the eyes of his mate. Now, he said, his voice softening into something that was for her alone, yet heard by millions. Now, we finish this. Bring our daughter to me. Chapter 10. The command was a quiet rumble over the comms, but in the silent echo it sounded like a thunderclap. Elara's heart leapt into her throat. This was it, the moment of absolute, irrevocable truth, not in a sterile lab, but before the eyes of the world. Elias was already moving. Right, time to move, lass. He powered down the broadcast override, leaving the screens in the grove to return to a stunned, silent crowd staring at their king. The path is clear. Cyrus cleared the jammers and the immediate threats, but we must be quick. He helped Elara bundle a wide-eyed Poppy into a thick hooded cloak. "Remember, little spy, just like we talked, you walk straight to your dad. Don't look at the noisy people, just look at him." Poppy nodded, her small face set in an expression of grave concentration. She clutched Elara's hand tightly. The rear hatch of the Echo hissed open, revealing not the wild forest, but the very edge of the sacred grove itself. Cyrus had guided them to a hidden ingress mere yards from the tree line. The contrast was jarring, from the electronic gloom of the vehicle to the vast open space filled with tense silence and thousands of staring faces. Elara took a deep, shuddering breath. The scent of snow, pine, and the coppery tang of blood from the duel filled her senses. She could feel the weight of every gaze, the suspicion of the nobles, the desperate hope of the commoners, the bitter hatred of Magnus's remaining loyalists. Her legs felt like water. Then she saw him. Cyrus stood alone in the cleared space before the obsidian stone. He had cleaned the blood from his hands and face, but his clothes were torn, his shoulder bandage stark white against the dark fabric. He looked exhausted, battered, and more magnificent than any king in polished armor. His golden eyes found hers across the distance, and in them she saw an ocean of unwavering faith. He gave a single slow nod. "For Poppy, for our future."
The thought steeled her spine. Squaring her shoulders, Elara lifted her chin. She would not cower. She was not a fugitive. She was the Luna. Holding Poppy's hand, she stepped out of the shadows of the trees and into the blinding light of the solstice sun. A gasp, then a ripple of whispers swept through the crowd as they saw her. The woman from the broadcast, in the flesh, and the child. They began to walk. The path from the tree line to the stone seemed miles long. Elara focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on the warmth of Poppy's small hand in hers. She could hear individual voices now. "So it's true. Look at her eyes, just like the king's. The child is so small." They passed the dais where Silas, now in silver shackles, wept silently under Leo's cold gaze. They passed the still unconscious form of Magnus, being tended to by guards with no kindness in their motions, and finally they stood before Cyrus. Up close, she could see the fine lines of pain and exhaustion around his eyes, but also the profound peace that had settled there. He didn't smile. This was a sacred moment. He simply looked from her to Poppy, his expression one of awe. He knelt, bringing himself to Poppy's level, ignoring the gasps from the nobles at this breach of royal protocol. "Hello again, little star," he said, his voice so soft only they could hear. "Hi, Daddy," Poppy whispered back, her earlier spy bravado replaced by a natural trusting shyness. "You have a ouchie." "It's nothing," he said, his eyes shimmering. "Are you ready to meet the big rock?" Poppy looked past him at the towering monolith of obsidian. It absorbed the sunlight, looking like a shard of frozen night. She nodded. Cyrus stood and held out his hand, not to take Poppy from Elara, but to join them. Elara placed her free hand in his. His grip was strong, grounding, a tether to reality. Together, the three of them turned to face the pack stone. The silence was now so profound Elara could hear the wind sighing through the distant pines. Every camera, every eye was fixed on the small family and the ancient rock. "The stone recognizes true lineage," Cyrus announced, his voice carrying without strain. "It recognizes the heart of the pack. It does not lie. It cannot be fooled." He looked down at Poppy. "Whenever you're ready, sweetheart." Poppy glanced up at her mother. Elara gave her an encouraging nod, though her own heart was hammering against her ribs. This was it, the final proof. If the stone remained dark, all of this, the duel, the broadcast, would crumble into dust, and they would be branded the greatest deceivers in history. Poppy let go of their hands. She took one small,
2 small steps forward on the trampled snow until she stood directly before the sheer black face of the monolith. She looked so incredibly tiny before it. She reached out a small mittened hand. Time stopped. For 1 heartbeat, 2, nothing happened. The stone was just a cold, dark rock. A wave of anxious murmuring began to build. Elara's breath caught. Cyrus's hand tightened around hers. Then a faint pulse, a glimmer like a silver star seen through deep water at the very center of the stone where Poppy's mitten touched it. Another pulse, stronger. Then it erupted. A column of pure, blinding silver light shot from the apex of the stone, piercing the winter sky. It wasn't a harsh light, but a radiant, moon-bright glow that bathed the entire grove in an ethereal, peaceful luminescence. The runes carved in the obsidian blazed to life, swirling with inner fire. But most breathtakingly, the light coalesced above Poppy's head, forming the shimmering, spectral image of a majestic wolf. Not just any wolf, but the legendary Great Wolf, the mythical progenitor of the royal line. It threw its head back in a silent, triumphant howl that resonated in every wolf's soul. The reaction was instantaneous and electric. It wasn't just a glow, it was the sign, the strongest reaction in living memory, stronger than that for Silas, stronger than that for his father. A roar of pure, unadulterated joy and acceptance exploded from the crowd. It started with the commoners in the back, a wave of sound that crashed over the nobles, breaking their stunned silence. They weren't just cheering in air, they were witnessing a miracle. They were witnessing the future. The heir, the princess, long live the royal family. Tears streamed down Elara's face, unchecked. The light wasn't just from the stone, it was the release of 6 years of fear, the validation of her love, the glorious, terrifying dawn of their new life. Cyrus looked at her, his own eyes gleaming with unshed tears, his face transformed by a joy so deep it was painful to behold. He pulled her into his side, his arm a solid band around her shoulders, as they watched their small daughter, illuminated by the ancient magic of their people, turn and smile at them, her little face filled with wonder. In that moment, surrounded by the roaring approval of the pack, under the celestial light of the stone, the lonely king, the hidden mother, and the miracle child were no longer 3 separate souls. They were a family, and the kingdom had found its heart. Chapter 11. The silver light from the pack stones slowly faded, dissolving from a tangible column into a soft, lingering glow that clung to the obsidian like morning dew. But the energy in the sacred grove did not diminish. It transformed. The earlier tension of suspicion and impending violence was gone, replaced by a buzzing, celebratory fervor. The proof was not just in a scientific report, but in magic, in legend made flesh before their eyes. Cyrus did not bask in the adulation. He had one more duty to perform. Keeping one arm around Elara, he raised his other hand. The crowd's roar gradually subsided into an eager, respectful hush. People of the Blackwood pack, you have seen the truth. You have witnessed the deception meant to divide us, and the legacy meant to unite us. He looked down at Poppy, who had retreated to cling to Elara's leg, overwhelmed by the noise. His voice softened just a fraction for the next words. The laws of this pack were written in a different time, laws that allowed fear and obsession with purity to fester, to create shadows where traitors like Silas could breed. His gaze swept over the assembled council elders, who flinched. Those laws end today. He turned his head, making sure every camera caught his profile, his expression of unyielding resolve. By my authority as Alpha King, I hereby abolish the purity edicts. No wolf shall be deemed lesser for the rank of their birth or the species of their mate. The worth of a wolf is in their heart, their loyalty, and their strength of character, not in the pedigree of their bloodline. A new kind of cheer erupted, this one especially fierce from the outer ranks, from the Omegas and unranked families who had borne the brunt of those ancient cruel laws. It was a sound of liberation. Furthermore, Cyrus continued, the steel returning to his voice, the High Council is hereby dissolved. Its functions will be assumed by a new council of voices, one elder elected from each territory, not appointed by blood, but chosen by the people of that territory, and they will answer not only to their king, but to the pack they serve. It was a revolution delivered with the calm authority of a king reclaiming his throne. He wasn't asking for permission, he was stating the new reality. Finally, he looked at the crumpled form of Magnus, now stirring to consciousness under guard. Alpha Magnus Blackwood, Cyrus announced, his tone glacial. You are guilty of treason, attempted regicide, and the attempted murder of a child. Your life is forfeit. The crowd held its breath. Execution was the expected sentence. But the blood of our family has been spilled enough on this snow. Cyrus's eyes found Elara's for a brief second, as if drawing strength from her presence. You are stripped of your title, your lands, and your pack. You will be taken to the furthest border and exiled. If you ever set foot on Blackwood lands again, any wolf may execute you on sight without penalty. You are nothing to us. It was a punishment perhaps worse than death for a man like Magnus, to be rendered nameless, packless, a ghost. He was dragged away, sputtering impotent curses, into the trees. With the traitors dealt with and the new laws proclaimed, a palpable shift occurred. The formal ceremony was over. What remained was a pack, reunited and electrified. Royal guards, now confident in their authority, began to gently encourage the crowd to disperse, to celebrate the true solstice in their own ways. Cyrus finally turned his full attention to his family. The public mask fell away, leaving only a man bone-weary and emotionally spent. He knelt again, this time fully, ignoring the cold, wet snow, and opened his arms. Poppy didn't hesitate this time. She launched herself into his embrace, burying her face in his neck. You did so well, my brave, brave girl, he murmured into her hair, his voice thick. He held her for a long moment, then stood, lifting her easily to rest on his uninjured hip. He looked at Elara. No words were enough. The journey from a snowy festival to this moment was an epic no story could contain. He saw the tears drying on her cheeks, the tremble in her hands, and the unshakable strength in her eyes. He simply reached for her hand again, lacing their fingers together. Leo approached, a smile finally breaking through his usual stern demeanor. The convoy is ready, sire, the proper one this time, to take you home. The ride back to the Blackwood estate was the polar opposite of the desperate flight in the stealth transport. They traveled in a sleek, comfortable limousine, part of a small, efficient motorcade. Poppy, utterly drained, fell asleep almost instantly, curled between them on the plush seat. Elara watched the winter landscape roll by, the same landscape that had been a terrifying wilderness just days before, now seeming peaceful, even beautiful. It's not over, is it? She asked quietly, not looking at Cyrus. The fighting, maybe, but the rest, being queen, the scrutiny. No, he answered honestly, his hand resting lightly on Poppy's back. It is not over. It is just beginning. There will be traditionalists who grumble. There will be adjustments, mistakes, frustrations. The new council must be formed. The laws must be rewritten. He turned his head to look at her. But we will face it, together, with advisors we choose, with Leo, with people like Elias. You will not be alone in a gilded cage, Elara. You will be at my side, helping me rule. Your voice will shape the new laws. Your experiences will guide my hand. He reached over and gently turned her face toward him. You are not just my queen. You are my partner, my balance. The truth of it settled into her soul, warming her thoroughly more than any car heater could ever. She wasn't a prize he had won, she was the missing piece of his kingdom. As the familiar gates of the estate appeared, they did not open to a scene of crisis. Instead, the long driveway was lined with staff, not just guards, but cooks, gardeners, cleaners. They stood silently, not cheering, but bowing deeply as the car passed, a show of respect, not just to their king, but to the woman and child who had returned with him. It was a quiet, powerful welcome. They were home, not as fugitives, not as prisoners, but as a family. The war for the throne was won. The longer, more complicated journey of building a new kind of kingdom was about to begin. And for the first time, Elara looked toward the towering spires of the castle, not with dread, but with a tentative, hopeful sense of purpose. The Blackwood estate was different. It wasn't just the absence of Silas's oily presence or the nervous energy of conspiracy. It was in the air itself, lighter, cleaner. The staff moved with a quiet efficiency, but their eyes, when they met Elara's, held a new warmth, a curiosity edged with respect. The story of the grove had spread like wildfire, and the image of their Luna standing defiant before the kingdom and the little princess awakening the stone had transformed them into interlopers, into legends. The first few days were a blur of necessary logistics. Cyrus was immersed in the immediate aftermath, formally disbanding the old council, establishing interim governance with Leo and a few trusted, reform-minded elders, and overseeing the secure transfer of Magnus into permanent exile. Elara was given space, but not isolation. A kindly, no-nonsense woman named Marin was assigned as her attendant, not a spy, but a guide to the dizzying world of royal life. Elara's primary focus was Poppy. The little girl had been through too much. She had nightmares, waking up crying about ice and loud noises. She was clingy and anxious in the vast, echoing halls of the estate. So Elara did what she knew. She created a nest. She had the furniture in their wing rearranged, making a cozy corner by a sunlit window filled with pillows and books, and Poppy's few precious toys from their old life. She insisted on simple, familiar foods. She spent hours just holding her, reassuring her with touch and quiet words that the bad men were gone. Cyrus, whenever he could escape the endless meetings, would join them. He didn't try to force a relationship. He would simply sit on the floor near their nest, sometimes working on a tablet, sometimes just listening to Elara read a story. He brought Poppy small, thoughtful gifts, not castles or jewels, but a perfectly round white stone he found in the garden, a book about constellations, a set of watercolors. Slowly, tentatively, Poppy began to seek him out, showing him her paintings, asking him quiet questions about being a wolf. One afternoon, a week after their return, Elara found Cyrus standing at the window of his private study, staring out at the training grounds below, his shoulders tense. The formal bandage was gone, but he still favored the arm. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said softly from the doorway. He turned, and the weariness in his eyes was profound. "The northern territories are restless. Magnus's former lieutenants are exploiting the void, calling my reforms weakness. They're stirring up the old purity rhetoric, saying I've been bewitched." He ran a hand through his hair in a rare gesture of frustration. "I have to go. A show of strength, a parley. I must secure the border before this spark becomes a wildfire." Elara's heart stuttered. "Go? How long?" "A week, perhaps 2. He walked toward her, stopping an arm's length away. "I don't want to leave you, not now, not when we've just—" He gestured between them, at the fragile new piece of their family. "Then don't," she said, surprising herself with her own firmness. He blinked. "Elara, it's not safe. It's the heart of Magnus's old territory. There will be hostility." "And here is safe?" she challenged, stepping closer. "With traitors maybe still hidden in the walls? With Poppy jumping at shadows? You said we would face things together. You said my voice would matter." She took a deep breath. "So let my voice say this, we come with you." Cyrus stared at her, stunned. "It's a diplomatic mission wrapped in a military one. It's no place for a child." "It's the perfect place for this child," Elara insisted, her voice gaining strength. "They are spreading lies about her, about me, about you being bewitched. What is stronger, a king arriving with an army to intimidate, or a king arriving with his family, his clearly legitimate fated mate family, to speak to his people? Let them see her, Cyrus. Let them see that she's just a little girl who loves to paint and needs her father. Let them see that I'm not a sorceress. I'm a mother who wants peace for her child. The stone chose her. Now let the people see why." Her words hung in the sunlit room. Cyrus looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, not just as his mate, but as a strategist, a queen in thought as well as title. The idea was radical, dangerous, and brilliant. It was a move neither Magnus nor his hardline followers would ever anticipate. It was a move of profound confidence, not in armies, but in truth. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, erasing the fatigue. "You're right," he shook his head in awe. "By the moon, you're absolutely right. We go as a family. We show them the future isn't something to fear, it's something to build." The planning shifted dramatically. The show of strength convoy was redesigned. It would still include elite guards and tactical units, but the lead vehicle would be a family transport. They would travel openly, stopping in towns along the northern route. Cyrus would hold public audiences, not just with alphas, but with pack members of all ranks, and Elara and Poppy would be at his side. Poppy, when told they were going on a trip with Daddy to see mountains and new people, was initially nervous, but when Cyrus showed her the map on a map, letting her put a shiny sticker on each town they would visit, it became an adventure. The night before their departure, Elara stood on the balcony of their wing, watching the moon rise. Cyrus joined her, slipping a warm cloak over her shoulders. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. "No," I answered honestly, leaning back against his solid chest, "but I'm more sure about this than I am about staying here, waiting and worrying. This feels active, like we're not just accepting our destiny, we are shaping it." He resting his chin on the top of her head. "You have changed everything, Elara. You've changed me. For so long I ruled from a place of power and isolation. You've shown me that the true source of strength is this." He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "It's connection. It's family. It's terrifying," he admitted with a soft chuckle, "but it's the only thing worth fighting for." Below them, in the moonlit gardens, the first brave buds of early spring flowers were pushing through the retreating snow. A new season was beginning. Tomorrow they would travel into the heart of the old cold, not as conquerors, but as gardeners, hoping to plant seeds of a different future, together. Chapter 13. The journey north was a revelation. The royal convoy, though well guarded, moved at a deliberate, accessible pace. They did not thunder through villages, they stopped at them. Cyrus's first public audience was not in a fortified keep, but in the central square of a modest timber town called Frostvale, where the air smelled of sawdust and baked bread. News of the king's approach and the stunning rumors of who traveled with him had flown ahead. The square was packed, the mood a thick soup of curiosity, skepticism, and for some, simmering resentment. Elara stood beside Cyrus on a simple, raised platform, her hand in his. Poppy, wearing a practical little parka, held Elara's other hand, her eyes wide as she took in the sea of unfamiliar faces. Cyrus didn't give a grand speech. He stepped forward, his presence commanding silence. "People of Frostvale," his voice carrying easily, "for too long the North has heard the voice of the crown only through decrees or the lies of ambitious men. I am here to listen." A gruff older warrior, a former lieutenant in Magnus's militia by the looks of his scars, shouted from the crowd. "We hear you brought the witch and the changeling. Is it true you've forsaken the old ways for a pretty face?" A tense ripple went through the crowd. The guards tensed. Cyrus didn't react with anger. He simply turned and held out his hand to Elara. This was the moment. Her pulse hammered. She squeezed Poppy's hand, then let go of Cyrus's and stepped forward to stand beside him alone. The silence was absolute. "My name is Elara," she said, her voice clear, carrying the same unvarnished truth it had over the broadcast. "6 years ago, I was a kitchen maid in the lower district. I am not a witch. I am a mother. And the changeling," she looked at the skeptical old warrior, "is my daughter." She turned and beckoned to Poppy. Poppy, after a second's hesitation, walked to her mother's side, slipping her small hand into Elara's. The sight was disarmingly ordinary, a mother and her child, standing before them. "She likes to paint pictures of rabbits," Elara continued, her voice softening. "She's afraid of the dark sometimes. She dropped an ice cream cone and accidentally told the king her biggest secret." A few surprised chuckles came from the crowd, disarming the tension. "The old ways you speak of, the ones that would call her a half-blood and me unworthy, those ways told me my daughter deserved to die for the crime of existing."
Those ways sent men to kill her in her bed. Her voice hardened, not with malice, but with a mother's righteous fire. "Are those the ways you want to protect? Ways that murder children?" The old lieutenant's defiant expression faltered. He looked at Poppy, who was now peeking out from behind Elara's leg, not with the eyes of a demon, but with the shy curiosity of any small child. Cyrus stepped forward again, placing a hand on Elara's shoulder, a gesture of unity and support. "The old laws are gone," he stated. "The new law is simple. Loyalty, strength, and honor are not born of pure blood, but proven by pure action. This is your Luna. This is your princess. They are my family, and any threat to them is a threat to the heart of this entire pack." He then did something no Northern Alpha would ever do. He stepped down from the platform and walked into the crowd, toward the old lieutenant. The guards moved, but Cyrus waved them back. He stopped before the man. "You served my cousin. You fought for what you believed was the strength of the North. That loyalty, even misplaced, is not without value. The North is strong, but its strength must be directed outward to protect our borders and our future, not inward to tear apart our own families." He offered his hand. "Serve that future with me." The square held its breath. The old warrior stared at the king's offered hand, then at the family on the platform, then back at Cyrus. Slowly, grimly, he took the king's hand. It was not a joyful gesture, but it was one of acceptance, a truce. That moment in Frostvale set the tone for the entire journey. In each town, the pattern repeated. Initial hostility or wary silence, disarmed by Elara's plain-spoken truth and Poppy's innocent presence, then solidified by Cyrus's combination of unwavering principle and respect for Northern pride. He didn't dismiss their concerns, he redirected them. He spoke of shared prosperity, of trade, of uniting against true external threats. Elara found her own role evolving. She began visiting the town healers, the schools, the community kitchens, listening to the women, to the elders. She heard about shortages, about poorly built roads isolating villages in winter, about fears for their children's futures. She didn't promise solutions on the spot, but she listened and she remembered. One evening, as they made camp in a forest clearing near the northern border, Cyrus reviewed dispatches by lantern light. Elara sat nearby, making notes on a tablet about the need for a midwife training program in the remote valleys. "You're better at this than I am," Cyrus said, suddenly, looking up at her, his expression one of open admiration. "At what?" Elara asked, her throat tight. "At hearing them," he said, gesturing vaguely northward. "I speak of laws and borders and legacy. You speak of roads and schools and sick children. They fear my crown, Elara, but they trust your heart." Poppy, who was attempting to roast a marshmallow on a stick over a small, guarded fire with Leo's amused help, called out, "Daddy, my marshmallow is on fire!"
Cyrus laughed, a real, full-bodied sound that made several nearby guards turn in surprise. He went to help her, showing her how to hold it over the embers, not the flame. Elara watched them, the lantern light painting them in gold and shadow, the fierce king gently teaching his daughter a simple, sweet skill. This was the strength they were showing the North, not the sterile, rigid strength of isolation, but the resilient, living strength of a family, of a pack that cared for its smallest members. The icy resistance they had expected was mile by mile, town by town, beginning to thaw. They were not just securing a border, they were weaving the frayed northern territories back into the fabric of the kingdom, thread by patient, truthful thread. The final, most stubborn knot awaited them at the border stronghold itself, the seat of Magnus's former power. But for the first time, Elara felt not dread, but a steady, determined hope. They were winning not with claws, but with something far more powerful. Chapter 14. The Stone-Hold Fortress was the clenched fist of the northern territories. Hewn from the living gray rock of the border mountains, it was a place of grim functionality, all sharp angles and narrow arrow slits, devoid of the elegance of the southern estates. Here, Magnus's ideology was law, and his most fervent loyalists, those who believed in purity of blood and the supremacy of northern strength above all, had made their last stand. As the royal convoy approached up the winding, exposed road, the air grew colder, charged not with winter but with a silent, waiting hostility. No crowds gathered here. The heavy iron portcullis was down. Armed sentries watched from the battlements. This was not a town square to be won with words. This was a fortress to be subdued. Cyrus called a halt 100 yards from the gates. He turned in his seat, his gaze settling on Elara and Poppy. The easy confidence of the journey hardened into something more serious. "This is different," he said, his voice low. "The men inside, they are not farmers or tradesmen swayed by sentiment. They are warriors who tied their honor to Magnus's cause. They feel betrayed and cornered. There will be no gentle audience here." "What do we do?" Elara asked, her throat tight. Poppy, sensing the shift, leaned quietly against her. "We offer a choice," Cyrus said, his eyes like chips of gold flint. "One last clear choice." He looked to Leo. "Ready the perimeter. No one fires unless I give the order. This ends without more Blackwood blood on the snow, if I can help." He stepped out of the vehicle, followed by Leo and a contingent of his personal guard. Elara watched, her hand resting on Poppy's back. This was his arena now, the final test of his authority. Cyrus walked forward, alone, stopping well within bowshot of the walls. He didn't shout, he just stood, a still, powerful figure against the bleak landscape, and waited. For long minutes, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of ancient iron, the portcullis rose just enough for a single figure to emerge. It was Kale, Magnus's former beta. He was tall and gaunt, with a permanent scowl and eyes that held the frost of the deepest winter. He marched out, stopping a dozen paces from Cyrus. "Blackwood," Kale spat the name like a curse. "You come to our gates with your southern tricks and your corrupted line. You dishonor your father's memory." "My father's memory is honored by securing the future of his pack, not by letting it fracture into warring tribes. The dishonor lies with those who would murder a child for politics." "A child born of weakness," Kale shot back, his hand twitching toward the axe at his belt. "You dilute the royal blood. You spit on centuries of tradition. Magnus saw it. He tried to save us from you."
Magnus saw a path to the throne, Cyrus corrected, taking a single, deliberate step forward. The gesture was a challenge in itself. He used your pride, your fear of change as a weapon. And where is he now? An exile, nameless, while you are here, guarding a rock for a dead man's dream. Kale's face contorted. "We guard the true North, the strong North, not the soft, compromised South you've created." "Strength?" Cyrus's voice dropped, becoming dangerously quiet. Is it strength to hide behind walls while your people in the valleys wonder if the crown has forgotten them? Is it strength to cling to laws that breed hatred and division within our own pack? He gestured back toward the convoy. True strength is there, in a mother who faced down an entire kingdom to protect her cub, in a little girl who awoke the heart of our oldest magic, in a pack that chooses unity over purity. That is the future, not this frozen relic. He took another step. He was now well within Kale's striking range. A collective breath was held on both sides of the field. I am your Alpha King, Cyrus declared, his alpha power rolling off him in a palpable wave that made even the distant sentries shift uneasily. I am offering you and every man behind those walls a place in that future. Lay down your arms, swear your loyalty anew, and help me build a North that is strong with the kingdom, not against it. Kale trembled, a war playing out on his face, the ingrained loyalty to a lost cause against the undeniable commanding presence of his rightful king. The ideology he clung to was abstract. The man before him was real, powerful, and offering a path forward from certain destruction. Or, Cyrus said, his final word dropping like a stone, I can force me to tear these walls down to get to my own people inside, and history will remember you not as stalwart defenders, but as the last fools who chose to die for a lie. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. Kale's gaze flickered past Cyrus, to the convoy, and for a fleeting second to where Elara and Poppy sat, visible through the window. He saw not monsters, but a family. He saw the end of his world and the terrifying possible beginning of another. His shoulders slumped. The defiance bled out of him, leaving only a weary, hollow man. Slowly, with a sound of finality, he unbuckled his axe belt and let it fall to the frozen ground. He went down on one knee, bowing his head. The Stonehold recognizes its alpha, he said, the words ripped from him. It was not a joyous surrender, it was a grim acceptance of reality, but it was enough. At a signal from Kale, the portcullis rose fully. The sentries on the walls lowered their weapons. One by one, the fortress garrison emerged, laying down their arms in a growing pile before Cyrus. The Northern Rebellion was over. Cyrus placed a hand on Kale's shoulder, a gesture of bleak forgiveness. Rise. Your loyalty will be judged by your actions from this day forward. See to your men. As Cyrus turned and walked back to the convoy, the weight of kingship and the relief of peace warring on his face, Elara understood the true cost of the throne. Victory wasn't always cheers and glowing stones. Sometimes it was the quiet, heavy sound of axes hitting frozen earth, and the somber acceptance of broken men. But it was victory. The kingdom was whole. That night, for the first time in generations, the Alpha King slept within Stonehold, in a spare, cold chamber, with Poppy asleep between them on the narrow bed. Elara lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the fortress. Cyrus's arm was around them both, his breathing deep and even. It's done, she whispered into the darkness. No, he murmured, half asleep. It's just quiet for a moment, but the quiet is good. We can build in the quiet. And for the first time since a little girl had touched a moon mark on his wrist, the world was not ending or beginning in fire and chaos. It was simply, peacefully continuing, with them, a family, at its heart. The long winter was finally, truly over. Chapter 15. Spring came to the Blackwood estate not as a timid visitor, but as a conquering hero. The snow retreated, revealing emerald lawns dotted with crocuses and snowdrops.
The windows of the castle, once shrouded in heavy drapes, were thrown open to let in the gentle, sun-warmed breeze. The change was more than seasonal, it was woven into the very stones of the place. Laughter, once a rare and guarded sound in the grand halls, now echoed with genuine frequency, often following the joyful shrieks of a little girl racing through the corridors with a patient, lumbering wolfhound puppy, a gift from the now loyal northern garrison. Elara stood on the sun-drenched balcony of the royal wing, the same balcony where a lonely king had once stared down at a gala with icy boredom. Now she leaned against the warm stone, watching the scene below. In the newly dedicated public gardens, a group of children from all pack ranks played a chaotic game of tag. Among them was Poppy, her chestnut curls flying, her laughter ringing clear as a bell. She was no longer just the miracle princess. She was simply a girl playing, her earlier fears softened by security and time. A pair of strong, warm arms encircled her from behind, and a chin rested gently on her shoulder. She didn't need to turn to know it was Cyrus. His scent of sandalwood and winter sunshine had become the smell of home.
"She's trying to teach the puppy to howl in tune," Cyrus murmured, his voice a contented rumble against her back. "It sounds uniquely terrible." Elara smiled, leaning into him. "She gets her musical talent from your side, I'm told." A soft chuckle vibrated through him, a blatant slander. He was quiet for a moment, watching with her. "Do you remember," he said, his voice softening, "do you remember standing right here that first night? You asked me how long it would last, the safety, the peace?" "I remember," she whispered, placing her hands over his where they rested against her. "I didn't have an answer then, but I have one now." He turned her gently in his arms to face him. The harsh, carved lines of the feared Alpha King had softened. The gold in his eyes was still there, a latent power, but it was tempered now by a profound, settled warmth. "It will last as long as we tend to it. It will last as long as we remember that the crown is not a prize we won, but a duty we share. It will last as long as we listen to the voices in the garden," he nodded downward, "and not just the ones in the council chamber." He reached up, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her cheekbone, then down to brush the line of her jaw. "You brought the spring, Elara, not just to the land, but to me, to this whole weary kingdom." Tears pricked her eyes, but they were tears of pure, sunlit joy. "We brought it," she corrected softly, "together." From below, Poppy's voice carried up, "Daddy, Mommy, look, he did it." They looked down to see the gangly wolfhound pup sitting obediently, offering a wiggly paw. The small victory in the grand scheme of a kingdom was everything. Later that evening, after Poppy had been tucked into bed, stories told and kisses given, Cyrus led Elara not to the formal throne room, but to the castle's oldest library. It was a cozy, book-lined sanctuary. In the center of a worn Persian rug, he had spread a thick blanket. A simple picnic basket sat open, revealing cheese, fruit, and a bottle of non-alcoholic elderflower cordial. "A proper date," he said, almost shyly, "one without assassins and councilmen for a change." They sat, talking not of statecraft, but of small things, of Poppy's latest painting, of a funny incident with the new puppy, of a book Elara was reading. The conversation was easy, the silences comfortable. The mate bond between them, once a taut, painful thread stretched across years, now hummed with a contented, steady energy, a golden cord connecting their souls. As firelight danced on the shelves of ancient books, Cyrus took her hand, his expression turning solemn. "I have something for you." From his pocket he drew not a jewel, but a simple polished silver band. It was engraved with two intertwining patterns, a crescent moon and a scattering of tiny stars on one side, a delicate blooming poppy flower on the other. "It's not a crown," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a promise that I see you, not just as my Luna, but as Elara,
the woman who loved our daughter enough to face a world of shadows, the woman brave enough to walk into a fortress of enemies with only the truth as her shield, the woman who is my heart and my home. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Will you build this life with me, officially, completely, for all our days? Elara looked at the ring, a symbol of their blended souls, their shared story. She looked up into the face of the man who had fought armies and changed laws for her, who had knelt in the snow to speak to her daughter, who had learned to lead not from a place of lonely power, but from a place of connected love. She didn't say yes. She showed him. She cupped his face in her hands, her honey whiskey eyes holding his molten gold, and she poured every ounce of her love, her trust, her fierce and joyful commitment into the look. Then she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, the same intimate gesture he had used to claim her in a dirty alley, now a seal of their mutual vow. "Always," she breathed. And in the quiet library, with the ghosts of old kings looking on from their portraits, a new kind of reign was truly consecrated, not in a blaze of glory or a clash of swords, but in a whisper of promise, in the warmth of intertwined hands, and in the quiet, unshakable certainty of a love that had melted winter itself. Outside, under a sky dusted with 1,000 stars, the Blackwood pack slept in peace. Their king was no longer made of ice and steel, but of devotion and resolve. Their queen was not born of noble blood, but of unimaginable courage. And their heir, their future, dreamed in a sunlit room, a small silver moon and star mark on her wrist glowing faintly in the dark, a gentle, constant pulse of the magic that had saved them all. A reminder that the most powerful force in any kingdom is not an army, but the brave, stubborn, healing power of a family's love.